it is time to break down the Super Syntax, one of our favorite regions in the state. And no one better to talk about the Super Syntax than DJ Ramirez from the Waco Tribune-Herald. DJ, thank you so much for hopping on with us. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are y'all today?
Doing well. We were saying it's so cool that you work for the Waco Trib, because that's actually where Dave Campbell got his start. So a close to home spot for us. When we bring people on, we love to have them tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, and what led you over to the Waco Trib.
I spent most of my childhood in North Houston, Aldine for all my H-Town people. And then my family had to move out to Louisiana when I was in middle school, so that's where I graduated from high school before coming over to Waco to go to Baylor, actually. And I was working for my high school yearbook, putting together pages, and gravitated towards sports. I was never super athletic. Can't say that I ever made it past JV, but I always really loved writing, and so that was kind of something I was drawn to. And I got to Baylor, majored in journalism, worked for the student newspaper, the Baylor Lariat, and was the sports editor there, where I met Bryce Cherry, who's the sports editor of the Waco Trib. And then after I graduated in the spring of 21, I went to work an internship with the Big 12 for a year. And while I was there, Bryce shot me a text and was like, hey, we might have a position open by the time the summer rolls around. So why don't you send me your resume and some clips and stuff? And so, as soon as, the next summer came around, I was back in Waco and getting ready for high school football season.
And that we were doing the same exact thing, but week 1 is finally under our belts. Thank goodness. What a crazy week it was. Were there any shocking upsets or maybe surprises down in the Super Syntax area that made you go, I might need to take a second look? I can tell you one, Franklin upsetting China Spring. I think that was a huge upset on Franklin's behalf.
Well, I guess I was at that game. I was covering that game that weekend, and I don't really think that it was so much a surprise that Franklin was able to beat China Spring, but it was more that, China Spring is in a way reloading. I mean, you lose a veteran kind of seasoned quarterback in Cash McCollum, right? Who's had kind of, he comes in and he's got this sort of quiet but imposing presence. And, when he came into China Spring, he really earned his spot, right? Like, he didn't come over from Waverly and expected that he was going to be the quarterback. He came in, built relationships. He really built that leadership aspect, and because the talent was already there. And it's not that Matthew Battles doesn't have the talent or the athleticism, or hasn't build the chemistry with the team, but he's definitely, I think, still going to have to learn a little bit of what it takes to be, the guy under center, to be the veteran, because he's had the reps, but he doesn't have that sort of imposing presence that Cash McCollum did. And then some of these other kids are just young. They're just going to have to learn. And that's just something that is going to take time. Obviously, the first week of the season is always going to be, there's always going to be mistakes. There's always going to be some things that you have to clean up. But I think in the long run, China Spring is going to, get back on track. But I am not surprised that Franklin beat them. Franklin's a good team. They still have a lot of talent. They were they have a really good running back. I'm trying to remember how to say his name right. But yeah, he was just really hard to stop, and they ended up making less mistakes in that game.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, I mean, you talk about it, obviously, China Spring, a very young team, very capable under good coaching there with Tyler Beatty to be able to get back to where they need to be. It seems like there's an overwhelming presence of those type of teams in the Super Syntex right now. China Spring being one of them. You look at a team like Lorena and Temple. Out of any of those teams that are typically in the statewide spotlight that might just have a couple of growing pains in this week 1 through 4 type of scenario, which one of those teams do you think personally has the best shot to really break out of this funk pretty early on and get back on the normal track that we're used to seeing them on?
Well, I mean, obviously China Spring, like I said, just if you clean up some things, you get some more reps with some guys, you're going to be great. Same thing with Lorena. I feel like they definitely have more holes to fill in terms of, like, you know, they lost Braylon Henry, who had a historic season last year, and have a lot of really young guys also stepping in. You know, they had, I think, their opening game was more of like, you know, trying to get those younger kids who have never really been in those positions before to understand that, you know, when you make mistakes against a good team, it's going to hurt you. So I think those are two teams that are going to, like, you know, get back on track eventually. It's just not going to be instantaneous, right? Like, there's going to be some learning, some growing going on. There's not very many teams that I can think of, you know, really shocked or I feel like aren't going to, you know, do the things that they're usually good at.
No, I think you're completely right. And big school ball there, China Spring, like you mentioned, Temple definitely going to get back on track. But let me tell you who is already on track, and that's small school ball, especially in Class 1A. I mean, let's look at 1A Division 1. You've got number 1, Gordon, who won state last year, number 2, Abbott, and number 3, Jonesboro. And then dropping down a division in 1A Division 2, you got number 2, Richland Springs, 3, Oglesby, who was a state runner-up last year, and number 6, Cherokee. Small school obviously is the name of the game down there in the Super Syntex. Which kind of teams are you looking out for? And maybe that's not in Class 1A, but what teams are you looking out for to maybe make that another state run?
Well, I mean, if we're going to stick with 1A, I think Abbott is never a team you want to doubt. And I kind of really bit myself this week by picking against them when they played Oglesby. I was thinking Oglesby coming back from, you know, that state title game, that they were going to be hungry to start, you know, the season off on the right foot, which I'm not saying that they weren't. They definitely were. But, you know, Abbott's also a team that's used to being successful. And, you know, nobody likes to lose, but especially not the Abbott Panthers. They have so much tradition. And, I mean, they're not really changing a lot with the, you know, coaching change, because Kyle Crawford has been there his whole life, right? And, you know, he's taking over for his dad. So that's not really going to be they're not going to do anything different. They're just doing the things that they know how to do well, exceptionally well. So Abbott for sure is a team that I expect to see, you know, deep in the playoffs. 2A, there's a lot of great 2A teams around this area. I mean, Axtell is one we're looking at for sure. They were coming off of a 10-0 year in the regular season last year where they won the district championship, and then kind of, you know, were, to most people's surprise, out in the first round of playoffs. And so talking to Coach Craig Horn before the season, he was talking about how, you know, they kind of weren't thinking about playoffs during the regular season. They wanted to win the district championship, and they kind of figured everything else would take care of itself. And so this year they really wanted to build a team that was playoff ready. And, you know, they definitely challenged themselves a little bit more in their non-district schedule. And so they're definitely a team that's going to be good. I think, you know, Crawford, Marlin, Riesel, those are teams that in that district that used to be the district that Valley Mills, which is now in the district that Axel was in. And so, you know, they're going to be pretty good. And you know, at the 3A level, Whitney is coming off of a win over Mart. So, and obviously they had more depth than that, but I think it's definitely a good statement to make, to come out and get a strong, solid win against, a former state champion. So, a lot of really great programs around this area, and it's exciting to get to go and watch them play.
Well, there she is. She's DJ Ramirez with the Waco Tribune-Herald. You can follow her on Twitter at @DJ_Ramirez. DJ, thank you so much for hopping on. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to reading all your coverage there in the Waco Tribune.
All right. Thank you so much.